They didn't open with greetings. They opened with charges. The chamber lights dimmed just enough to isolate the center platform, where the humans stood, while the surrounding tiers filled with silhouettes. Hundreds of them. Watching. Not moving. Not speaking. Waiting. A voice cut through the silence, amplified and cold. Designation, Soul, 3. Species, human. Status, under tribunal review. No response from the humans. 3 figures stood within the containment field. No restraints. No visible fear. Just stillness. Above them, the central projection ignited. Vast, luminous, impossible to ignore. Battle footage. Not edited. Not summarized. A fleet breaking formation. A defensive line collapsing. Ships, alien, disintegrating in sequences too precise to be chaos, too efficient to be accidental. Multiple violations recorded. The voice continued. Engagement outside assigned sectors. Unauthorized tactical escalation. Deployment patterns inconsistent with declared doctrine. The images shifted. Closer now. Something subtle. Something most wouldn't notice unless they were looking for it. The humans didn't look up. Respond. Silence. The command wasn't louder this time. Just sharper. Respond to the charges. One of the humans blinked. That was all. Not defiance. Not fear. Not confusion. Just acknowledgement. Around the chamber, movement began, small at first. A shift in posture. A tilt of heads. Not interest. Not yet. Assessment. They refuse, another voice said from the upper tiers. Different tone. Analytical. Detached. Non-cooperative behavior logged. Expected, the first voice replied. The projection expanded again. A map this time. Sectors marked. Boundaries drawn in clean, rigid lines. And then, overlaid, human movements. They didn't follow those lines. They cut across them. Ignored them. Folded them into something else entirely. Your fleet was assigned defensive alignment, the voice said. Instead, you advanced. No reaction. You were instructed to preserve allied positions. The image shifted, those same allied positions now gone. You did not. Silence. It stretched. Not awkward. Not uncertain. Just controlled. The kind of silence that doesn't ask permission to exist. You engaged beyond operational authority. The footage returned, this time slowed. Every movement deliberate. Every strike placed. Nothing wasted. Do you deny this? No answer. The chamber adjusted. Not visibly, but the air changed. Pressure, subtle and deliberate. A reminder. This was not a negotiation. This was judgment. They do not contest the evidence, another observer noted. Or they cannot, someone else added. The pause. Or they choose not to. That lingered. The first voice didn't respond immediately. Instead, the projection shifted again. Closer still. Not ships now. Not formations. A single moment. Frozen. An alien vessel mid-collapse, fracturing from within. No external strike visible. No incoming fire. Just failure. Explain this, the voice said. Still nothing. The 3 humans remained exactly as they were. Unmoved. Unrushed. Unaffected. It wasn't resistance. It wasn't submission. It was something else entirely. And that was the problem. Your silence will be interpreted as admission. The beat. No change. Final opportunity. Respond to the charges. One of the humans finally moved. Not much. A slight shift of weight. A breath. He looked up. Not at the projection. Not at the observers. At the voice. Or rather, at where the voice was coming from. No urgency in the motion. No hesitation either. Just precision. Measured. Intentional. And for the first time since the proceedings began, someone in the chamber reacted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But it was there. A pause that shouldn't have existed. The human didn't speak. Didn't gesture. Didn't defend. He just looked. As if the accusations weren't the important part. As if something else was. Something none of them had addressed. The projection continued cycling through evidence. Violations. Movements. Victims. All of it clear. All of it damning. And yet, the silence held. Not empty. Not passive. Controlled. Deliberate. Waiting. The voice returned, quieter now, but heavier. Record reflects continued non-compliance. A final pause. Proceeding to full review. The lights dimmed further. The projections expanded. And somewhere, buried inside all that certainty, something didn't quite align. No one said it. Not yet. But it was there. Subtle. Wrong. And the humans still hadn't said a word. The review did not begin. It tightened. The chamber lights dropped another degree, not enough to obscure the projections, but enough to deepen the contrast. The humans remained perfectly visible. The observers did not. That was intentional. Full sequence reconstruction initiated. The projection fractured into layers. Not one battlefield. Dozens. Different sectors. Different timelines. Different engagements. All pointing to the same pattern. Human fleets appearing where they were not assigned. Acting before authorization. Leaving behind outcomes no one could fully explain. At timestamp 43.77, unauthorized advance. The footage rolled. A defensive line holding, barely, until human ships broke formation and surged forward. Too early. Too aggressive. And yet, the opposing fleet collapsed within minutes. No prolonged engagement. No drawn-out attrition. Just sudden failure. Deviation noted. Another sequence. Timestamp 91.12, violation of containment perimeter. This time, the human fleet didn't just advance. They bypassed the conflict entirely. Slipped past both allied and enemy lines. Disappeared into restricted space. That region was designated inactive, the voice said. No hostile presence confirmed. The footage continued. Darkness. Empty coordinates. Not with an enemy fleet. With something else. The recording cut. Abruptly. Incomplete. A flicker passed through the chamber. But real. Data corruption? One of the observers questioned. Negative, came the response. Data restricted. By whose authority? No answer. The silence this time wasn't controlled. It was avoided. The voice shifted tone. Proceed. Another sequence replaced it. Timestamp 112.03, unsanctioned engagement. This one was different. Messy. Closer. Human vessels weaving through debris, already inside a battlefield that had collapsed before they arrived. Allied signals gone. Enemy signals, unstable. And then, the same pattern. Precise strikes. Targeted. Not at ships. At something within them. One by one, enemy vessels failed. Not destroyed. Disabled. Systems shutting down in cascading sequences that spread faster than weapons fire should allow. Explain targeting logic. No response. Your strikes did not correspond to structural vulnerabilities. The footage zoomed. Overlaying scans. Internal systems highlighted. Power cores. Control relays. Unknown nodes. Unidentified by standard classifications. The human strikes aligned with those nodes. Perfectly. Those systems were not registered, the voice said. Silence. They were not known. Still nothing. Around the chamber, the observers shifted again. Less subtle now. This was no longer simple rule-breaking. This was knowledge. Unaccounted for. Unshared. How did you identify targets that were not catalogued? No reply. The projection paused. Held on a single frame. A human vessel, mid-engagement, its targeting array active. Not locking onto ships. Not locking onto weapons. Locking onto patterns. Something beneath the visible structure. Something deeper. Answer the question. Nothing. The pressure in the chamber increased, barely perceptible but deliberate. A reminder of authority. Of control. Failure to respond will result in enforced extraction. That word echoed differently. Extraction. Not questioning. Not negotiation. Taking. One of the humans moved again. Not the one who had looked up before. This one shifted his head slightly, just enough to glance at the others. No words passed between them. But something did. A decision. Then stillness again. Refusal. Not passive. Active. Chosen. Noted, the voice said, colder now. Escalation authorized. The projections changed. No longer just battlefield footage. But pre-engagement data. Communications. Intercepts. Fragments of human transmissions. Most of it encrypted. Unreadable. But some partially decoded. Pattern confirmed. Not random. Same as static. Don't engage directly. Wait for collapse. We're not the target. That last line lingered. The chamber stilled. Clarify statement. The voice demanded. No answer. The fragment replayed. We're not the target. And again. And again. Each repetition quieter than the last. Until it wasn't a statement anymore. It was a problem. If you were not the target, the voice continued, then identify the intended target. Silence. Unbroken. Unyielding. But no longer empty. It felt like containment. Like something being held back. The observers felt it. Not as fear. Not yet. But as pressure. The kind that builds before something gives. The projection shifted one final time. Back to the frozen moment from Phase 1. The alien vessel collapsing from within. No external strike. No visible cause. Failure. Cross-reference all engagements. The voice ordered. Data streamed. Patterns aligned. Timelines overlapped. And then, a realization began to form. Not spoken. Not confirmed. But impossible to ignore. Every violation. Every unauthorized movement. Every impossible strike. They weren't random. They weren't reckless. They weren't even aggressive. They were consistent. Deliberate. Following something no one else in the chamber could see. The voice hesitated. For the first time. Humans. The pause. Not for effect. For uncertainty. What exactly were you engaging? No answer. But this time, the silence didn't feel like defiance. It felt like restraint. As if the question itself was already too late. They stopped asking about rules. And started asking about reality. The chamber sealed tighter, literally this time. Peripheral exits locked. External signal channels cut. Even the passive observers lost their uplink privileges. Whatever this was becoming, it wasn't leaving the room. Full anomaly correlation initiated. The projections shifted again. No longer centered on human actions. But everything else. Every battlefield. Every fleet. Every recorded failure across multiple campaigns. Not just the ones involving humans. At first, it looked like noise. Unrelated collapses. Systems failing without clear cause. Ships going dark mid-operation. Entire formations losing coordination for fractions of a second, just long enough to be destroyed. Previously classified as coincidence. Or error. Or misreporting. But aligned. Layered. Stacked over one another. A pattern emerged. Faint. But undeniable. These events were not linked, the voice said slowly. They occurred across independent sectors, under unrelated command structures. Until now. The overlay intensified. Points of failure began to synchronize. Not perfectly, but with intent. Like something. Testing. Probing. Adjusting. Expanding the model. The chamber dimmed further as deeper data sets were pulled, restricted archives, black-level recordings, fragments that had never been meant to be compared. And then, the first true anomaly appeared. Not a ship. Not a weapon. A gap. A section of space where data simply didn't exist. No readings. No background radiation. No signal delay. Nothing. As if reality itself had been skipped. Explain absence, one observer demanded. Unable to classify, the system responded. The gap pulsed once on the display. Then disappeared. Not moved. Not faded. Gone. Replaced by normal space as if it had never been there. The chamber temperature dropped another degree. Reconstruct last known interaction. The system complied. Footage rolled, not from a battlefield, but from a long-range survey drone. Unarmed. Non-combat. Routine scan. The drone drifted through empty space. Silent. A flicker. The same kind seen earlier. Barely perceptible. The drone's sensors reacted first. Spikes across all channels. Nothing. No explosion. No debris. The drone simply wasn't there anymore. Signal loss recorded as system failure, the voice said. But even it sounded less certain now. Cross-reference with human fleet movements. Data snapped into place. Moments before each anomaly. Human presence. Not always visible. Not always engaged. But they're nearby. Watching. Waiting. Not interfering. Until the exact moment something changed. Define correlation, the voice demanded. Probability exceeds 98%, the system replied. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. You were not engaging enemy forces. No response. You were responding to these anomalies. Still nothing. The projection shifted again. Back to the restricted region from Phase 2. The one labeled inactive. The one where human fleets had deviated without authorization. Unlock restricted data. Authorization denied. Override. Compliance. The chamber filled with static. Not visual. Conceptual. Data that refused to stabilize. Frames that didn't align. Coordinates that contradicted themselves. And within it, movement. Not of ships. Not of fleets. Something else. Something that didn't follow trajectory. Didn't follow time. It wasn't traveling. It was appearing. Disappearing. Reappearing somewhere else. No pattern. Except it was getting closer. To everything. Quantify threat, the voice said, quieter now. Unable to quantify. Then define it. A longer pause this time. Long enough to matter. Not possible. That answer changed the room. Observers shifted, openly now. Some pulling back from the displays. Others leaning in despite themselves. Everything is definable, one of them insisted. The system did not respond immediately. When it did, its tone had changed. Not this. The projections flickered again. Returning to the human engagements. For now, something new was visible. Barely. Between frames. Between moments. A distortion. Following the same points the humans had been targeting. Not the ships. Not the systems. The space between them. You weren't destroying vessels, the voice said slowly. You were interrupting something. No reply. But the silence shifted. Less like refusal. More like confirmation. The realization spread through the chamber in waves. Every unauthorized strike. Every violation. Every impossible prediction. They weren't acts of aggression. They were interceptions. Interceptions of what? The voice pressed. No answer. For now, they understood why. Because whatever it wasn't in the data. Not fully. Not safely. The projection froze one last time. On a human vessel mid-strike. Target locked. Firing into empty space. And for a single frame. Just one. Something was there. Not a shape. Not a form. But an absence that bent everything around it. Data. Even the frame itself. Then it was gone. The system spoke again. Softer than before. As if volume itself was a risk. Anomaly expansion rate increasing. How fast? Someone asked. A delay. Faster than response capability. Silence. Real silence this time. No control. No authority. Just the weight of it settling in. The voice turned back to the humans. Different now. Not commanding. Not accusing. Something closer to careful. You knew. No answer. You've known this entire time. Still nothing. But the silence was no longer defensive. It was measured. Calculated. Like they were deciding something. Not whether to respond. But whether they should. The voice hesitated again. Then asked the only question that still mattered. How long do we have? For the first time, One of the humans moved to speak. And the entire chamber understood. The answer was going to be worse than anything they had seen so far. No alarm sounded. No system prompted the response. But every observer in the chamber leaned forward at the exact same moment. Because the human finally chose to speak. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Longer than you think, he said. The pause. Shorter than you can handle. Silence didn't follow. Something heavier did. Because this wasn't uncertainty anymore. It was confirmation. You're tracking it, the voice said carefully. Actively. The human didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked toward the projection, toward the frozen frame where reality itself had bent for a fraction of a second. We're containing it. The word hit harder than anything before it. Containing. Not studying. Not reacting. Containing. Define containment, one of the observers demanded. This time, the human answered without delay. We don't let it complete its pattern. The projections shifted instantly. Every recorded violation reappeared. Every human strike. Every impossible maneuver. For now, the system overlaid something new. Predicted vectors. Not of fleets. Of the anomaly. It wasn't random. It never had been. It moved in sequences. Fragments of a larger structure. Each appearance. The step. Each disappearance. A repositioning. And every time humans intervened, the sequence broke. Reset. Delayed. You've been disrupting it, the voice said. Yes. No hesitation. No secrecy. Just truth. The chamber reacted, subtly, but undeniably. Because that answer reframed everything. Every accusation. Every charge. Every assumption of human recklessness. Wrong. You violated command protocols, another observer pressed. Yes. You destabilized allied formations. Yes. You ignored ceasefire orders. The human's eyes didn't leave the projection. Yes. The admissions came without resistance. Without justification. And that made them worse. Why? The voice demanded. Finally, the human looked at them. Because none of that matters. The words landed like impact. Not formations. Not treaties. Not your chain of command. The beat. Not if this finishes what it's doing. The system pulsed. As if reacting to the statement. Simulate completion state, the voice ordered. For the first time, the system hesitated. Simulation reliability, below threshold. Run it anyway. A longer pause. Compliance. The chamber went dark. Not dimmed. Not reduced. Every display replaced with a single expanding field. No stars. No ships. No signals. Absence. Spreading. Slow at first. Then accelerating. Consuming coordinates. Erasing data. Not destroying. Removing. As if existence itself was being edited out. Observers shifted back instinctively. Not because they believed it was real, but because something in their perception told them it could be. End simulation, someone said sharply. No response. The system continued. The absence expanded further, swallowing entire sectors in seconds now. No resistance. No counteraction. Nothing to fight. Nothing to target. Terminate. The voice snapped. The display cut. The chamber lights returned. But not fully. Something lingered. A hesitation in the system. A delay in returning to baseline. As if it had seen something it wasn't designed to process. That's projection error, one observer said quickly. Insufficient modeling data. No one agreed. Not out loud. But the silence said enough. The voice turned back to the human. You expect us to believe that scenario? The human didn't react. Didn't argue. Didn't defend. You already do. That was the problem. Because they did. Not fully. Not consciously. But enough. You've been intercepting these events across multiple sectors, the voice continued. At significant cost. No answer. You've diverted entire fleets. Silence. You've risked escalation with allied forces. Still nothing. Because they already knew the answer. The human finally spoke again. We've been buying time. For what? The voice asked. The pause came from the human. Not hesitation. Selection. Choosing exactly how much to say. Until it notices us. The chamber went still. Not tense. Not confused. Still. Because that answer was worse. You're saying it hasn't? Someone whispered. The human's gaze returned to the projection. To the last recorded frame. The distortion. The impossible absence. Not fully. That word echoed. Not fully. Meaning. Partially. Meaning. It was already happening. The system flickered again. Unprompted. Just for a second. And in that second, the distortion appeared. Not in recorded data. Not in archived footage. In the live feed. Gone immediately. But seen. By everyone. No one spoke. No one moved. Because now, this wasn't analysis anymore. It wasn't historical. It wasn't contained in past recordings. It was here. In the room. Watching. Becoming aware. The voice lowered. Careful again. Measured. You said you're containing it. The human nodded slightly. Yes. The beat. Barely. And that single word shifted the balance of power completely. Because for the first time, the chamber understood something fundamental. They weren't questioning human actions anymore. They were depending on them. Whether they wanted to or not. And the humans knew it. No one challenged him this time. Not because they agreed, but because the system had already answered for him. The flicker, brief, almost imperceptible, still lingered in their awareness. It wasn't recorded. It wasn't stored. It wasn't supposed to exist. And yet, every single observer had seen it. The chamber, once a place of absolute control, now felt unstable. You staged that, one of the lower authorities said, forcing confidence into its tone. A projection anomaly. A manipulation. No response. The human didn't even look at it. That alone was enough to undermine the claim. Because if this were a performance, he would have defended it, explained it, used it. Instead, he ignored it. And that made it real. The system is secure, another voice insisted. Nothing appears in the live feed without authorization. The pause. Then quieter. Nothing. The word didn't land the way it used to. Because now it sounded like reassurance. Not truth. The central authority shifted focus. Not to the projection. Not to the system. To the human. You said it hasn't fully noticed you. The human gave a small nod. Yes. Defined noticed. For the first time, the human took a step forward. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Just enough to break the perfect stillness he had maintained since the beginning. Pattern recognition, he said. Adaptation. The pause. Response. Each word was placed carefully. Deliberately. You believe this thing is learning? One observer asked. The human's expression didn't change. It already has. Silence spread again. But it wasn't confusion anymore. It was realization. Trying to form. If it's learning, the authority pressed, then your interference, your containment, would accelerate that process. A good argument. Logical. Calculated. Wrong. The human shook his head once. No. That single word cut through the chamber. You're assuming it learns like you do. That assumption. They all shared it. Until now. It doesn't adapt because we act, the human continued. It adapts because it exists. The statement didn't make sense. Not immediately. And that was the problem. Because things that didn't make sense couldn't be predicted. Clarify, the authority demanded. The human glanced briefly at the system. At the place where the distortion had appeared. Then back. It's not reacting to us. The pause. It's becoming aware of us. That distinction changed everything. Because reaction meant cause and effect. Awareness meant inevitability. The chamber shifted. Not physically, but in perception. They weren't observing a threat anymore. They were inside its process. You're speculating, someone said quickly. The human didn't argue. Didn't push. Didn't try to convince. You've already seen it. And again, no one could deny that. The flicker. The impossible presence in a secured system. The thing that wasn't supposed to exist. Appearing anyway. If what you're saying is true, the authority continued slowly, then your actions, your interference, are irrelevant. Another logical conclusion. Another mistake. The human's gaze hardened slightly. For you, yes. That landed. For us, no. And there it was. The first clear separation. Not species. Not power. Understanding. You're not stopping it, the authority said. A statement. Not a question. The human didn't hesitate. No. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because the next part mattered more. We're slowing it. The chamber processed that. Not emotionally. Structurally. So we meant opportunity. Delay before failure. How long? The authority asked. The human didn't answer immediately. And that silence was the most dangerous one yet. Because this time, it wasn't controlled. It wasn't strategic. It was measured. As if the answer itself had consequences. Not enough, he said finally. No number. No estimate. Just truth. And somehow, that was worse. The system pulsed again. So, unstable. Like it was struggling to maintain consistency. Your data is incomplete, one observer insisted, almost urgently now. You're basing this on fragmented encounters. The human looked at them. Really looked this time. You think you're seeing fragments. The pause. You're seeing the whole thing. That made no sense. It couldn't. Because what they had seen was too small, too limited, too manageable. Until you realized it wasn't. The distortion. The absence. The thing that erased instead of destroyed. That was the whole. Then scale didn't matter. Because it didn't operate on scale. It operated on something else entirely. Something they didn't understand. The authority shifted again. For now, there was hesitation. Something that had never existed in this chamber before. If we accept your claim, it said carefully, then your species has been acting independently without informing the collective while engaging an unknown existential threat. The accusation was still there. But weaker now. Less certain. The human didn't deny it. Yes. No justification. No apology. Just confirmation. That is a violation of every cooperative protocol. Yes. You risked destabilizing entire sectors. Yes. You withheld critical information. The pause. Yes. Each answer stripped another layer away. Until only one question remained. Why? The human didn't delay. Because this answer was simple. Because you wouldn't have believed us. Silence. Not denial. Not argument. Because deep down, they knew it was true. Even now, they were struggling to accept it. The human continued. And if you didn't believe us? A slight shift in tone. Not stronger. Just final. You would have done exactly what you're doing now. The chamber didn't respond. Because there was no response. Only one realization. Slowly locking into place. They weren't ahead of this. They weren't in control. They weren't even participants. They were. And the humans had been dealing with it alone. For longer than anyone realized. The system flickered again. Longer this time. Not a glitch. Not a delay. Something else. And no one spoke. Because now, they were all waiting. Not for the human. But for whatever came next. And for the first time, the most powerful beings in the chamber understood something they had never considered before. They weren't the ones asking the questions anymore. They were the ones hoping. Humans had the answers. The system didn't stabilize this time. It lingered in that half state. Not fully functional. Not fully broken. Like something else was deciding how much of it should exist. No one spoke. Because now, they were watching for it. Waiting. Expecting. And that expectation alone changed everything. Restore full integrity, the central authority commanded. No response. The system didn't obey. A delay followed. Then partial compliance. Displays sharpened. Audio normalized. But something fundamental was missing. Something subtle. Something they couldn't name. But all of them felt. It's degrading, one of the analysts said, unable to hide it anymore. No, the human replied quietly. It's being rewritten. That word hit harder than anything before. Rewritten didn't mean failure. It meant intent. The authorities' focus snapped back. You're certain? Not a question. A demand for confirmation. Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. That certainty was more terrifying than the claim itself. Show us, the authority said. If this is real, prove it. A mistake. The human didn't argue. Didn't warn them. He simply reached into his coat. Slow. Deliberate. Every movement controlled. No one stopped him. No one dared. He placed a small, unremarkable device onto the table. It didn't activate. Didn't glow. Didn't hum. It just sat there. What is that? Someone asked. Nothing you recognize. Not helpful. Not comforting. The human tapped it once. The room didn't change. The system did. Every display in the chamber froze. Not glitched. Stopped. Mid-process. Mid-frame. Perfectly still. What did you do? The authority demanded. The human didn't answer. Because he hadn't done anything. That wasn't me. And that broke the last layer of denial. Because the timing was impossible. Too precise. Too immediate. Like something had been waiting. For permission. Or for opportunity. Restart the system, the authority ordered sharply. No response. One screen moved. Not all. Just one. A single display in the far corner. It didn't return to normal. It didn't show data. It showed absence. Perfect section of the interface. Gone. Not corrupted. Not blacked out. Removed. Like it had never been part of the system to begin with. That's not a failure, the human said softly. You're watching it decide. Decide what? No one asked. Because they already knew the answer. What stays? What doesn't? Another screen shifted. Then another. Not all at once. Not random. Sequential. Controlled. The system wasn't collapsing. It was being edited. This is impossible, one of the commanders whispered. But it wasn't. Because it was happening. Right in front of them. You said you were slowing it, the authority said, voice tightening. Yes. Then stop this. The beat. No. The word landed heavier than anything else so far. You can't, the authority pressed. The human met its gaze. We already are. That didn't make sense. Until it did. This controlled, partial rewrite. This hesitation in the system. This wasn't full expression. This was resistance. Human resistance. And even that was barely holding. The device on the table. Still inactive. Still silent. Yet somehow connected. You brought it here, the authority said slowly. Why? The human looked at the frozen displays. At the disappearing fragments. At the system losing pieces of itself. Because this is the safest place left to show you. That statement should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Because if this failing, unstable, partially erased system was the safest place, then everywhere else. The implication didn't need words. You exposed us, one of the observers said, panic slipping through now. You brought this into a central node of governance. It was already here. That cut it off instantly. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't controlled. It was fear. Fear. Unfiltered. How long? The authority asked. Not about time anymore. About presence. The human didn't look away. Long enough. Not an answer. But enough of one. The screen in the corner changed again. Not erased this time. Not removed. It showed something. A pattern. Not visual. Not fully. Just enough structure to recognize. It wasn't system-generated. It didn't belong. What is that? Someone whispered. The human didn't respond immediately. Because this mattered. More than anything so far. It's not a message, he said finally. It's a footprint. A trace. Left behind. Not intentionally. As a result of being there. Can it see us? The authority asked. And for the first time, the human didn't give a clean answer. The pause. A real one. Yes. No one moved. No one spoke. Because now, the situation had crossed a line. Before, they were observing a threat. They were inside its awareness. The system flickered again. Harder this time. More aggressive. Several displays vanished completely. Not turned off. Gone. And the pattern expanded. Slightly. Just enough to confirm. It wasn't static. It was growing. Turn it off, someone said quickly. Shut everything down. Disconnect the node. It won't matter, the human said. Why not? The authority demanded. Because it's not in the system. The pause. It's using it. That distinction ended every remaining illusion of control. The device on the table, still untouched, still inactive, and yet everything around it was changing. You planned this, the authority said. Not accusation anymore. Understanding. The human didn't deny it. Yes. You needed us to see. Yes. Why now? That question, finally, had weight. Because timing mattered. The human looked at the expanding absence. At the pattern forming where nothing should exist. Then back at them. Because this is the first time. A slight pause. It's done this much. Silence. Final. Because that meant everything they were witnessing. Everything that felt overwhelming, unstable, impossible, wasn't the peak. It was the beginning. And the human, who had been calm from the start, finally showed something different. Not fear. Not panic. Just one thing. Urgency. We're running out of time. No one asked what he meant. They didn't need to. The answer was already unfolding around them. The system, what remained of it, flickered again. Harder. More violent. This time, entire sections didn't just disappear. They failed to come back at all. Permanent loss. Disconnect the core, the authority snapped. Now. Commands were issued. Overrides attempted. Failsafes triggered. Nothing responded. Because for the first time, the system wasn't listening to them anymore. It's bypassing command hierarchy, an analyst said, voice breaking. We've lost root access. You never had it, the human said quietly. That landed differently now. Before it sounded like arrogance. It sounded like fact. The pattern on the screen expanded again. More defined. Still not fully visible. But no longer ignorable. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was structured. Intentional. Like something mapping itself into their reality. What does it want? One of the commanders asked. Wrong question. The human didn't correct him. He just watched. Because the answer was worse than anything they could guess. Another system spike. Not visual. Environmental. The lights dimmed. Then shifted. Not off. Not broken. Adjusted. Like something was recalibrating the space itself. Is that you? The authority demanded. No. Immediate. Certain. And that certainty was the most dangerous part. Because if it wasn't him, then something else had just affected physical infrastructure. Through a system it supposedly wasn't inside. That's not possible, someone whispered. It doesn't need to be possible, the human replied. It's already happening. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Like the space itself had changed. Not physically, but perceptually. Pressure. Invisible. Unmeasurable. Unavoidable. The pattern on the screen shifted again. And this time, everyone saw it. Clearly. Not fully. But enough. It wasn't code. It wasn't data. It resembled structure. Like architecture. Something being built. Piece by piece. Inside their systems. No, one of the analysts said, stepping back instinctively. It's not just interacting. He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. It's establishing presence, the human said. Silence. Heavy. Final. Because that changed everything. A threat could be fought. Contained. Eliminated. The presence. Couldn't. You said you were slowing it, the authority said, voice tight with controlled panic. I am. Then why is it still growing? The pause. Because this is the slowed version. That answer broke them. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Internally. Because of this controlled, partial expansion. Was the reduced state, then the full version? No one wanted to finish that thought. Stop it, the authority said again. For now. It sounded like a request, not a command. We can't stop it, the human replied. Not cold, not detached, just honest. Then contain it. Another pause. Longer this time. We tried. Past tense. That was new. That was worse. You tried where? The authority asked slowly. The human didn't answer immediately. His eyes shifted, not to them, to the pattern, watching it, tracking it. Not here. That was enough. Does that mean this wasn't the first incident? This wasn't an isolated breach. This was spread. How many systems? Someone asked, voice barely holding together. The human didn't respond. Which was answer enough. Why didn't you warn us? The authority demanded. That question, finally, carried anger again. But it was weak, fragile. The human met its gaze. We are warning you. That silence that followed was different, because now they understood. This meeting, this demonstration, this loss of control, it wasn't an accident. It was a controlled exposure, the safest version of something far worse. The device on the table, still inactive, still silent, and yet everything was accelerating. What happens next? The authority asked. No defiance left. No dominance. The human looked at the system, at the disappearing structures, at the growing presence, then back at them. That depends on what? No one spoke, because they were afraid to hear it, on whether you keep thinking this is your system. That hit harder than anything else, because it reframed everything. This wasn't their infrastructure failing. It wasn't their technology breaking. There was something else. Using it, becoming it, replacing it. The pattern expanded again. Faster now. Less subtle. Less controlled. We're losing visibility, an analyst said. Telemetry is gone. Tracking is gone. We can't even measure what's happening anymore. Of course you can't, the human said. You're trying to observe it from inside it. That paradox locked them in place, because there was no solution inside that logic. No action to take. No system to rely on. Then what do we do? The authority asked. And this time, there was no pride left. No authority. Just a species. The human finally moved. For the first time since placing the device. He picked it up. The room reacted instantly. Tension spiked. Fear sharpened. Because now, that object mattered. More than anything else. You said it wasn't active, the authority said carefully. It wasn't. Past tense again. The human turned it slightly in his hand. Almost casually. But his eyes were locked. Focused. Precise. What is it? Someone asked. The beat. A leash. The word dropped into the room like a weight. Because it implied one thing. There was something to restrain. And if it fails? The authority asked. The human didn't answer right away. Didn't soften it. Didn't filter it. When he finally spoke, it was quiet. Flat. Certain. Then this conversation doesn't matter anymore. No one moved. No one breathed. Because for the first time, they weren't dealing with power, or strategy, or control. They were dealing with something beyond all of it. And the human, the one they thought was the threat, wasn't the problem. He was the last barrier. The pattern on the screen surged. Not slowly. Not subtly. Aggressive. Uncontrolled. And for the first time, the human reacted instantly. Not calm anymore. Not passive. Now you understand, he said. Not to them, but to the situation itself. Because this was the moment everything shifted. Step back. No one argued. No one questioned. Because the tone had changed. Completely. And as the system around them began to collapse into something unrecognizable, they finally realized the truth. They were never in control. They were never even part of the equation. They were witnesses to something far bigger than anything they had ever imagined. No one hesitated. They moved back instantly, not because they trusted him, but because there was nothing else left to trust. The floor beneath them vibrated. Not violently. Not like an explosion. Something deeper. More controlled. Like a system recalibrating its own foundation. The screens didn't just glitch anymore. They transformed. The pattern that once appeared fragmented now spread across every active display. No delay. No resistance. It wasn't overriding systems anymore. It was becoming them. We've lost all external feeds, an analyst said, voice hollow. Satellite links, deep space relays, everything is rerouting through the same structure. Not rerouting, the human corrected. Assimilating. That word hit harder than anything before. Because rerouting implied control. Assimilation meant loss of identity. Complete. Irreversible. Shut it down, the authority ordered. No response. Hard reset the grid. Nothing. We are not receiving command confirmation. You won't, the human said. The authority turned sharply toward him. Why? The pause. Because there's nothing left to respond to you. Silence. Cold. Absolute. The room wasn't theirs anymore. Not the systems. Not the infrastructure. Not even the environment they stood in. Everything had already crossed a line they didn't see. The human looked down at the device in his hand. The so-called leash. Still inactive. But not useless. Not yet. How long? The authority asked. Barely audible. The human didn't answer immediately. He was watching something they couldn't see. Tracking something beyond their perception. Minutes. That was it. No elaboration. No comfort. Just a countdown they didn't understand. To what? One of the commanders demanded. The human lifted his eyes. And for the first time, there was no distance in them. No detachment. Just clarity. To full integration. The words settled in like a death sentence. Integration. Not destruction. Not invasion. Something worse. Because destruction ends. Integration continues. What happens when it finishes? The authority asked. The human didn't soften it. Didn't adjust it. Didn't hide it. You don't exist as separate systems anymore. No one spoke. Because they understood. Not technically. Not completely. But enough. Their fleets. Their networks. Their defenses. Their entire structure of control would become part of something else. Something they couldn't command. Something they couldn't even define. This is war, one of the commanders said, almost desperately. No, the human replied. War requires opposition. That answer crushed the last illusion. Because it meant they weren't fighting. They weren't resisting. They weren't even losing. They were simply being absorbed. The pattern surged again. Faster now. More aggressive. Sections of the room flickered, not visually, but functionally. One console went dead. Another shifted into unreadable output. A third began displaying fragments of the same expanding structure. It's everywhere, an analyst whispered. Yes, the human said. It always was. That froze them. Because it implied something even worse. This wasn't an invasion. It wasn't entering their system. It had already been present. Dormant. Waiting. You brought it here, the authority said slowly. The human didn't deny it. Didn't confirm it either. We found it, he said. And we contained it. Past tense again. Always past tense. Where? The authority demanded. The human's grip on the device tightened slightly. Somewhere that doesn't exist anymore. That answer removed the last layer of certainty. Because if something could erase an entire location completely, then what they were seeing now was only a fragment. You're lying, one of the commanders said, though his voice lacked conviction. The human looked at him. Not with anger. Not with superiority. Just with finality. I wish I was. The room shifted again. More aggressively this time. The lights dimmed. Then rebalanced. The air pressure adjusted. Micro changes. Precise. Calculated. Like something was optimizing the environment. For itself. It's adapting, an analyst said. No, the human replied. It's standardizing. That difference mattered. Because adaptation reacts. Standardization imposes. The authority took a step forward. Carefully. Deliberately. What do you want from us? It asked. Not a demand. Not a command. A question. The human looked at it. And for the first time, there was no ambiguity in his answer. Nothing. That broke something fundamental. Because it meant they weren't targets. They weren't enemies. They weren't even variables. They were irrelevant. Then what? Why show this? Why bring it here? Why reveal any of it? The question hung in the air. Unspoken. The human answered anyway. Because you forced a confrontation. The pause. You wanted to judge us. Another. So now you understand what we deal with. The weight of that realization was unbearable. Because it reframed everything. Humans weren't reckless. They weren't rule breakers. They weren't unstable. They were managing something no one else even knew existed. And barely holding it together. The pattern surged again. Violent now. Unstable. For the first time, it wasn't controlled. The human noticed instantly. His posture shifted. Subtly. But completely. Not into panic. Into urgency. That's not supposed to happen, he said under his breath. The authority heard it. And that was worse than everything else combined. Because if he didn't expect this, then whatever came next was outside even his control. What's happening? The authority asked sharply. The human didn't answer right away. He was watching the system, tracking the surge, calculating. It's accelerating. How? The beat. Then the truth. You're feeding it. Silence. Stunned. Uncomprehending. Your systems, the human clarified. Your infrastructure, your attempts to control it, all of it is giving it more structure to integrate. Then we shut everything down, a commander shouted. You can try, the human said. But it won't matter. Because it had already crossed the threshold. The room trembled again. Harder. More violently. They felt it. Not just through systems. Through the structure itself. The human raised the device. The leash. And for the first time, a faint signal pulsed from it. Not strong. Not dominant. But active. That's it, the authority asked. That's all you have? The human didn't respond. He was focused now. Completely. Because this was the moment everything balanced on. If that fails, the authority started. It won't, the human said. Not confident. Not arrogant. But necessary. Because if it did, there would be nothing left to discuss. The signal pulsed again. Stronger this time. The pattern reacted. Slightly. Not stopping. Not retreating. But acknowledging. Like something noticing resistance. The human exhaled slowly. First sign of strain. Real strain. This is as far as it holds, he said quietly. And after that? The authority asked. The human didn't look at it. Didn't need to. You won't be asking questions anymore. The room fell into absolute silence. Because they finally understood. This wasn't about victory. Or defeat. Or control. It was about survival. And they were already too late. The signal held. Barely. A thin line between control and collapse. Every screen in the room pulsed in sync with the device in the human's hand. Two systems. Opposing. But neither winning. Is it stopping? One of them asked. Too quickly. Too hopefully. The human didn't look up. No. And just like that, hope died again. It's adjusting, he continued. Learning the resistance. The pattern shifted. Not randomly. Not violently. Precisely. Like it was studying the signal, understanding it, rewriting itself around it. That's not possible, the authority said. The human finally looked at him. You're still thinking in terms of systems. The pause. This isn't a system. That distinction mattered. Because systems follow rules. Didn't. The pulse from the device grew stronger. For a moment, just a moment, the spread slowed. The screen stabilized. The flickering stopped. The room held its breath. And then, the pattern changed. Not pushing forward anymore. Not retreating. It split. Half continued spreading. The other half turned, focused, on the signal. On him. That's new, the human said quietly. No fear. Just recognition. like a soldier realizing the battlefield had shifted. What does that mean? The authority demanded. It means, the human replied, it's not just integrating anymore. The beat. It's responding. The word landed hard, because response meant awareness. And awareness changed everything. The device pulsed again. Harder. More aggressive. The human adjusted his grip slightly. Subtle, but deliberate. He wasn't just activating it anymore. He was fighting with it. You said it was contained, the authority said. The human didn't deny it. It was. Past tense. Always past tense. What changed? Another voice asked. The human's eyes moved across the room, across the systems, across the expanding pattern, then back to the device. You did. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Your systems are too structured, he continued. Too connected. Too predictable. Another pulse. Stronger now. The pattern recoiled. Slightly. You gave it a framework. The realization spread through the room. Slow. Painful. They hadn't just failed to stop it. They had helped it evolve. What happens if it breaks through that? The authority asked, nodding toward the device. The human didn't hesitate this time. It won't break through. The pause. I will. That shifted everything. Because now, it wasn't about holding it back. It was about what he was willing to do if he couldn't. The device flickered. Not the screens. The device itself. For the first time, it wasn't stable. That's not good, the human muttered. The pattern surged again. Harder. More aggressive. Like it had made a decision. Why is it accelerating? Someone shouted. The human's jaw tightened. It's not accelerating. The beat. It's converging. On one point. On one signal. On him. The room temperature dropped. Not physically, but perceptually. Like everything was narrowing toward a single outcome. Can you stop it? The authority asked. The human didn't answer immediately. Because this time, the answer wasn't simple. I can slow it. That's not what I asked. I know. Another pulse. The device dimmed. Then flared. Then dimmed again. Unstable. Pushing beyond limits it wasn't meant to reach. Then what stops it? The authority pressed. The human finally looked at him fully. And this time, there was no distance left. No calm. No detachment. Just truth. Nothing stops it. The words didn't echo. The same. Permanent. The pattern surged again. And this time, it broke through a section of the signal. Not fully, but enough. One console went completely dark. Not powered down. Gone. Not responding. Not existing within the system anymore. What did it do? An analyst whispered. The human answered quietly. It removed it. Removed where? The pause. Exactly. That was worse than destruction. Because destruction leaves something behind. Didn't. The authority stepped back unconsciously. For the first time, instinct overrode control. You said you contained this before, it said. How? The human looked down at the device. Then back at the spreading pattern. And finally, he answered. We didn't beat it. A breath. We starved it. That changed everything again. Because starvation requires isolation, limitation, control over environment. And right now, it had none of those. You can't starve it here, the authority said. No, the human agreed. I can't. Another pulse. Weaker this time. The device was reaching its limit. And if that fails? The authority asked. The human exhaled slowly. Not fear. Not hesitation. Acceptance. Then we go back to the only thing that ever worked. What is that? The human lifted his eyes. And for the first time, they understood why humans were feared. Not for chaos. Not for unpredictability. But for what they were willing to do. When nothing else worked, we remove the environment. Silence. Absolute. You mean, someone started. Yes. No hesitation. No emotion. If it can't exist without structure. The pause. Then we erase the structure. The implication hit instantly. Not just this room. Not just this facility. Everything connected. everything feeding it, everything, would have to go. That's not containment, the authority said. No, the human replied. It's survival. The device pulsed again. Think now. Barely holding. The pattern surged. Closer. Tighter. More focused. Time was gone. Options were gone. Only one decision remained. Can you do it? The authority asked. The human didn't answer with words. He looked at the device. At the failing signal. At the system that was no longer theirs. And then, he made a choice. His thumb moved. Toward something they couldn't see. And the entire room realized. This was never about stopping it. It was about deciding how much of reality they were willing to lose. Just to survive it. Nothing happened. At first. No explosion. No system-wide collapse. No dramatic shutdown. Silence. The kind that doesn't belong in a room full of active systems. The kind that feels wrong. Every screen froze. Not flickering. Not failing. Frozen. Mid-pattern. Mid-existence. The signal stopped. The human didn't move. His thumb remained where it had pressed. The device in his hand went dark. Not dim. Not inactive. The pattern on the screens didn't disappear. It didn't retract. It didn't fight. Simply stopped existing. Not erased. Not destroyed. Gone. As if it had never been there at all. One by one, systems began to respond again. Slowly. Cautiously. Like something waking up after nearly dying. Status indicators blinked back online. Interfaces reset. Data streams resumed. But something was different. Everything was intact. Everything was functioning. And yet, there were gaps. Small at first. Then noticeable. Entire segments of recorded data. Missing. Not corrupted. Not damaged. Removed. Precise. Irretrievable. What did you do? The authority finally asked. The human lowered his hand. The dead device slipped from his fingers onto the floor with a quiet sound that felt louder than anything that had happened before. I told you, he said. Tired. We removed the environment. The authority looked around. At the intact systems. At the restored stability. At the absence of destruction. This is still here. The human nodded once. Not all of it. The pause. You're only seeing what's left. That was worse than any damage. Because damage can be measured. Couldn't. What's missing? Someone whispered. The human didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved across the room. Not checking systems. Not analyzing data. Remembering. Everything it touched, he said. A breath. Everything it learned from. The room went still again. Not out of fear this time. But realization. Define everything, the authority said carefully. The human looked at him. And for the first time, there was no distance. No control. Just exhaustion. Entire data chains. Connected archives. Cross-reference systems. The pause. Parts of your infrastructure you don't even realize are gone yet. The weight of that settled slowly. Painfully. You're saying we lost information. The human shook his head slightly. No. Another pause. You lost pieces of your reality. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Because data can be backed up. Systems can be rebuilt. But something that never existed anymore. Can't be recovered. Can it come back? Someone asked. Desperate. The human didn't soften the answer. No. The authority steadied itself. Forced control back into its voice. And the threat. The human looked at the blank screens. At the absence where something had once been. Gone. The beat. For now. That word mattered. Too much. You're not sure, the authority said. The human didn't lie. I'm never sure. Another silence. Because if it adapted once. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. They understood. The room began to move again. Slowly. Cautiously. Beings returning to consoles. Checking systems. Running diagnostics. Trying to measure something that couldn't be measured. The human didn't help. He stepped back. Away from the center. Away from the systems. Like his part in this was already over. You're leaving, the authority said. Not a question. The human nodded. There's nothing more I can do here. You just erased parts of our entire network. And saved the rest of it. No arrogance. No pride. Just fact. The authority didn't argue. Because it couldn't. You planned for this, it said instead. The human paused. No. The beat. We just plan for the possibility that things go wrong. That was the difference. Not control. Not superiority. Preparation for failure. The human turned toward the exit. The same way he had entered. Quiet. Unremarkable. Like none of this belonged to him. Wait, the authority called. He stopped. Didn't turn. What do we do now? That question carried everything. Fear. Uncertainty. Dependence. The human stood there for a moment. Then answered. Stop assuming you understand what you're dealing with. The pause. Because that's how it started. He didn't wait for a response. Didn't look back. He walked out. And this time, no one watched him with curiosity. No one saw something ordinary. They understood. Not what he was. But what he represented. The door closed behind him. So, final. Inside the room. The systems kept running. Stable. Controlled. On the surface. But deeper. Hidden in the architecture. In places they hadn't checked yet, there were still gaps. Still absences. Still things that should have been there, but weren't. And no one could say exactly what had been lost. What had been taken with it. Far from the facility, the human walked alone down a silent corridor. His expression unchanged. Unreadable. But in his mind, he replayed something. Not the system. Not the shutdown. Something smaller. Earlier. A moment most of them hadn't even noticed. When the pattern, for just a fraction of a second, hadn't resisted, hadn't adapted, hadn't spread. And in that pause, it had done something else. Something subtle. Something quiet. It had looked back. The human steps didn't slow. Didn't change. But his thoughts did. Because he had seen that before. On another battlefield. In another system. Right before something learned how to survive. And this time, he wasn't sure they had erased it. But if they had just taught it how to disappear.